Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience. I'm here tonight with my first impressions of the Feliks Audio Elise Mark II. And this is an OTL type tube amp that can also be used as a preamp. This was loaned to me for review by Feliks Audio out of Poland, and it currently sells through them for 1,799 euros. And that works out to 1,917 US dollars at the current exchange rate. It's also available in the US through Upscale Audio and Headphones.com and currently sells for 1,999 US dollars, which is a little bit more, but you save the shipping charges of getting this all the way over from Europe, and also I'm sure it cuts down on the shipping time. But anyway, this amp, like I mentioned earlier, is an OTL type of tube amp, and OTL stands for Output Transformerless. And basically what that means is there's two different types of tube amps. Well, three technically. You have your hybrid tube amps, which use tubes in your input stage and then solid state in the output stage. And then you have your OTL, which this is, which does not use transformers in the output stage, but these amps usually have a higher output impedance, and they're a little more picky about headphones and headphone impedance. So, and then you have the also have transformer coupled tube amps, which use transformers to lower the output impedance of the amp and make them suitable or a better match with lower impedance headphones. So ideal in OTL type amp, you want to use it with higher impedance headphones, but that's not always the case. Sometimes OTL amps actually work out real well with headphones with an impedance as low as even 32 ohms. Usually OTL type tube amps are recommended for dynamic driver headphoons. But once again, there are exceptions. Sometimes they're actually match up pretty well with some of the easier to drive planar magnetic headphones. The planar magnetics from Kennerton and some of the newer Hi-Fi Man headphones like the Ananda Stealth and the Aria Stealth, which are actually pretty easy to drive. But anyway, this amp is rated at 200 milliwatts maximum power output, and it has a total harmonic distortion of 0.4% at 20 milliwatts into 300 ohms. And I know if you're into solid state equipment, those figures aren't that impressive, but in reality, listening to them, I mean, that's just a fact. Tube amps don't measure as well as solid state amps, but I personally, from my experience so far, I've reviewed about half a dozen tube amps and I really like them. But anyway, this amp has one analog input. It's an RCA type single-ended, and those are on the rear. And then it has two analog outputs, which would be a 6.3 millimeter headphone output on the front and RCA single-ended outputs on the rear. And like I mentioned earlier, those can be used, they're volume controlled, and this can be used as a preamp into either another tube amp or into a solid state amp, which can warm it up quite a bit. The driver tubes on this, and excuse me if I don't know how to pronounce this, they're PS Vane. I don't know if that's supposed to be pronounced as one word. I don't even know how I would pronounce it. But anyway, the number on the tubes those are the driver tubes, and they're 6SN7, and then the power tubes are 6N13S. The size of this amp is 8 inches wide, 11.6 inches deep, and 6.5 inches tall, and it weighs in at 13.2 pounds. That's the amp alone, and I think the shipping weight on it was about 16 pounds. And I'm going to try to give you a closer look at this, but it's heavy, and do not want to even take a chance of dropping this. So anyway, I'll hold this up where you can see it here. It's an absolutely beautiful amp. I mean, it's just very simple design, very, nothing trying to be fancy, but it has an elegant look to it, in my opinion. Tubes are very large and have a beautiful glow to them. I love listening to this in the dark. On the front, you'll notice all you have is your 6.3 millimeter headphone output and a pretty large volume knob that's very smooth, and just like I said, I just love the way this thing looks. You can see if I turn it to the side, you can see the enclosure over the power transformer on this, and try to spin this around and give you a look at the back. On the back here, you have one set of RCA inputs and one set of RCA outputs that are volume controlled. And then you've got your AC input and you've got your power switch over to the other side there, which, there's no power switch on the front, so you got to reach around back, but it hasn't really been an issue to me. I've had a few amps that way. So anyway, before I get into the sound of this, I did want to mention that I've probably had this about a week now, but I've listened to it quite a bit because I'm really enjoying this amp and actually have quite a few hours in it, and have tried quite a few different headphones. But so far my listening, I've been using a CD transport from Cambridge Audio into a Topping D70S MQA version DAC. I do have some other DACs I will be trying out before I do my full review on this, which will hopefully be, I'm guessing probably about a month from now. But anyway, headphones that I've used so far reviewing this amp are the LSA HP2 Ultra, which is a dynamic driver headphone, the Kennerton Valley, which is a dynamic driver, and that would be the original Valley, and the Kennerton Thrower, which is a planar magnetic headphone, the ZMF Atrium, which is another dynamic driver, the Grotto SR80E, which is a dynamic driver, and then the Kennerton Ragnar, which is another planar magnetic, and two headphones from Hi-Fi Man, the Ananda Stealth and the Aria Stealth, which are both planar magnetics. And like I said, usually planar magnetic headphones aren't recommended for OTL Type 2 amps, but sometimes they can work out pretty well. I did review the little brother of this amp a couple of years ago, the Feliks Audio Echo, and it actually works really well with some of the easier to drive planar magnetic headphones. So I did want to try this, and I will be comparing that to the Echo. But anyway, getting into the sound, the first thing I want to point out, and the first thing I noticed, is this amp is very dependent on the headphones that I use, where some amps, the headphones don't make a lot of difference. I mean, each headphone's going to have its own characteristics, but there's a interaction between OTL amps and headphones that solid state amps just don't have, where can be a huge difference between two headphones that are basically the same. You can have two dynamic driver headphones with basically the same impedance, and yet that headphone can sound totally different on this amp than it does on some other amp. It's very interesting to me, the way they interact and the way they synergize. And the trick is, with an OTL amp, is finding the headphone that just matches up and synergizes in a perfect way. And that's the reason for testing a bunch of headphones. And I do have more headphones that I will be trying before I do my full review, and I will actually go in and during my full review go down the line with each headphone and talk about how it interacted with this amp and how it sounded. But anyway, basically this amp is made for dynamic drivers, so I'll start with that. And with most dynamic driver headphones, they're an excellent match, and they have a warm, rich, lush, and kind of on the bassy sound. And most dynamic driver headphones do sound either anywhere from a little bit to significantly more bassy than they would with just about any solid state amp. This amp is recommended for headphones anywhere from 32 ohms to 600 ohms. And I tried headphones. In fact, the Ananda Stealth, I think, is 27 ohms. And a planar magnetic, so theoretically that shouldn't match up. But what I did find out, like I said, with the Echo, is that some headphones that you would never think would be a good match for an OTL amp sounded outstanding with the Echo, so I did try some of those with this. I did, like I mentioned, try several planar magnetic headphones with this, and some of them did sound really good, but I just didn't feel that any of them were a perfect match with this. Some of the Feliks audio amps, they do say that they're recommended for both dynamic driver and planar magnetic, and the description of the Elise does not describe it as being recommended for planar magnetic headphones. And I did try a few, and some of them did sound really good. Take, for instance, the Kennerton Thror and the Kennerton Ragnar, the flagship closed back and open back headphones from Kennerton. When used with this amp, the mid-range just sounds absolutely beautiful. Just, I mean, better than I've ever heard it. Just beautifully warm and beautifully detailed. But the only problem and the only reason I can't recommend this amp as a perfect match to those two headphones is they both lose a little bit of their bass impact. The bass is still there and it still goes low, and can even have a pretty good rumble, but they just lose a little bit of the impact that they have with a good solid state amp. For some reason, the lower priced Echo actually seems to do better with those headphones. They don't seem to lose any of that bass impact with the Echo the way they do with this. And it's just a little bit. I mean, I could still listen to those headphones on this amp and enjoy them very much. So I'm not saying that if you have, you know, like a high-end Kennerton planar headphone, that this isn't going to work, because it does actually sound beautiful. It just loses a slight little bit of the bass impact that you would have with a good solid state amp. And I think it just may be a current issue where solid state amps with higher power outputs are able to provide that extra current that planar magnetics need, especially in the bass. So anyway, but I tried the Hi-Fi Man Ananda Stealth with this, and I thought it sounded really good. I mean, it's one of the easier to drive planar magnetics, and there might have been just a very slight drop in the bass impact, but other than that, it was beautiful. I really liked that headphone and thought it sounded great. And I did try the Hi-Fi Man Aria Stealth with this, and I switched back and forth between this, the Echo, or a few solid state amps, some pretty high-end solid state amps. Couple that I'm reviewing right now that I tried it with would be the Topping D90 Discrete, and also the FIO K9 Pro ESS version. And comparing this headphone or the Aria Stealth with those, and the Aria Stealth matches up pretty much perfect with both of those amps. It had a very similar sound with the Echo. Once again, might have lost just a slight amount of bass impact, but not enough to really be noticeable unless you switch back and forth between the two. But it just gave the Aria Stealth a beautiful mid-range once again, and just an incredible sound. But like I said, I'm not sure yet, and I'll review more. I'll look more into this, matching this up with some of the planar magnetics. But right now, I would just say that this amp is an outstanding match with every dynamic driver headphone I threw at it, and an almost perfect but not quite perfect match with some of the planar magnetics. I have not tried any hard to drive planar magnetics like the Sandara, which is semi hard to drive, and then some of the more power hungry like the HE560. I have not tried those, but those didn't match up real well with the Echo either, so I'm assuming those will not be a good match for this. But so far, the very best match has been the ZMF Atrium. The Atrium is a dynamic driver headphone. It's 300 ohms, and that headphone matched up with this amp is just outstanding. It is one of the best combinations I have heard up to this point. All the amps I've reviewed, all the headphones I've reviewed, the Atrium from ZMF with this amp is just incredible. It sounds really good with the Echo too. The biggest difference I'm hearing so far between this and the Echo is an outstanding amp for the price. That I have the original Echo, which sold for about, I think about $700 4 years ago now. But anyway, there's a new revised version, the Echo 2, and I think that sells for about $9.99. And I can tell you right now, that is an outstanding amp for the price. Feliks Audio refers to it as entry level. That's at least mid-fi amp by my standards and by most people's standards. But anyway, the biggest difference I'm hearing between this amp and the Echo is this one just has a, I wouldn't say larger soundstage, but a deeper soundstage with more depth and more of a three-dimensional sound, more layering to it. Other than that, they sound quite a bit the same to me, but I need to put more time into that also. Couple of other headphones, the Grotto SR80E, and I said this about the Echo, that it's another headphone. It's just a completely different headphone than it is listening to the SR80 with a solid state amp. With a solid state amp, the Grotto SR80 is kind of, the bass is there, but it's kind of lightweight. It doesn't have a lot of impact to it. The mid-range is very detailed, but kind of analytical and just can be harsh at times. And the treble is definitely bright and once again can get harsh with the wrong music. But what the Echo and this amp both do to the SR80 is incredible. Number one, it gives it just way more bass, deep, solid. Not the tightest bass in the world, but it actually sounds really good to me. It warms up the mid-range, kind of evens it out, smooths it, makes it just sound so much better, and kind of mellows out that treble that can be a little harsh. And the SR80E, there is a newer version, the X model, but the SR80E sold for $99. And I swear, you plug that in either to the Echo or into this amp, and it sounds like a $300, $350 headphone. In my opinion, that SR80E, when used with these amps, is up on the level of like a Hi-Fi Man Sundara. It is that much better. It's just a completely different headphone. But anyway, yeah, the Kennerton Valley, and this was the original and the LSA HP2. With this amp, it warms them up. It gives them a warmer, richer mid-range. It gives them a little bit more weight to the bass, and just makes them sound beautiful. And that's just the way a good OTL amp is. And this, I've heard a few, and this is right up there with the best, definitely. Before I come back with my full review, I did mention earlier I want to try this with a couple of other DACs. I want to hook this up to the DAC from the FIO K9 Pro ESS version. That thing has an incredible DAC in it, and I do have to send that back very soon. I kept it, overlapped it with the Topping D90 Discreet, but I've got to send that back. So that's going to be the first one I try, and use that as a standalone DAC into this, see how that sounds. Super detailed DAC. Still have the benchmark DAC 1. I'm going to run that through it. It's a little bit warmer, a little bit softer sound. And then I also want to try my Audio GD R8 MK2 big R2R DAC and see how that sounds through this. And I'm guessing that will be incredible, running a good R2R DAC through this OTL Type 2 amp. And then before I come back with my review, I've got more headphones I want to try with this, and I want to do a few comparisons. I want to do a more extensive comparison to the Feliks Audio Echo, which is a very similar but lower priced amp. And I've got two really nice tube amps. Excuse me just a second. I've got two really nice tube amps from Waveborn. One, the Preamp Plus is an OTL type amp, and then the Power Amp Plus is a transformer coupled amp. And that actually, the Power Amp Plus was my amp of the year last year, and I love that amp. So during the next few weeks, doing my full review, I'm definitely going to compare this to those amps and see how it compares. Like I said, I love both of those amps, but they do have a different sound. The Preamp Plus is great, like similar to this with the dynamic driver headphones and some of the easier to drive planar magnetics. But the Power Amp Plus, which is transformer coupled, that one matches up with any headphone I've thrown at it, even hard to drive planar magnetics. That one's putting out 3 watts per channel. So anyway, we'll definitely compare the Feliks Elise to those. And then I've also, I've got the LSA Hyperdrive 2, which is a hybrid tube amp, and I definitely throw that into the mix and do some comparisons with that too. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I should be back in realistically probably about a month with my full review of this, and I do have my year-end reviews coming up soon, and see if this makes it into any of my best of lists. So I'll see you in a few weeks. Once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And please be patient with me because I'm trying to learn some editing skills. Just started on my last video, trying some editing experiments. Don't know what I'm doing, don't have a clue, so I'm trying to figure it out. So please be patient if my editing skills aren't up to par yet. I'm going to work on it the best I can. The Headphone Experience at Facebook is up to well over 20,000 members now, like 20,150, something like that. You're all welcome over there. And once again, thanks for watching my video.